The day he moved in, the house seemed to carry its own quiet rhythm, a gentle hum of familiarity that made him both nervous and intrigued. He had only seen the listing online, a cozy, slightly old-fashioned home, tucked away on a quiet street, and yet, stepping into its garden, he felt an unspoken warmth that no photograph could convey. The morning sunlight spilled across the cobblestones, casting long shadows through the trees, and he hesitated for a moment, suitcase in hand, as if sensing that this was more than just a new address. The door opened before he could ring the bell. There she was. She was taller than he had imagined, with an effortless poise that made her presence impossible to ignore. She was in her early 40s, yet the grace in her movements, the calm certainty in her stance, made her seem timeless. Her hair, dark with streaks of silver at the temples, framed a face that was confident, beautiful, and softly inviting. Her eyes, warm and attentive, scanned him with quiet curiosity, but there was no judgment, only a subtle, knowing smile that made him shift slightly on his feet. "Welcome," she said, her voice calm and measured, yet carrying an unexpected warmth that reached directly into him. "I'm glad you made it safely." She extended a hand, and when he took it, the brief contact lingered slightly longer than necessary. It was a small touch, almost accidental, yet it sent a ripple through him, a faint but unmistakable awareness of her presence. As she guided him into the house, he couldn't help but notice the little things, the gentle sway of her hand as she motioned toward the hallway, the way she leaned in to explain which rooms were which, and the faint scent of jasmine that seemed to follow her, subtle and comforting. Every movement of hers held a quiet confidence. There was no hurry, no pretense. She noticed how carefully he stepped over the threshold, and the corners of her lips curled into a soft, amused smile. It was as if she could see him in a way no one else had yet. He tried to focus on the practicalities, setting down his suitcase, surveying the living room, but his attention kept flicking to her. How she stood with her weight slightly on one leg, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. How her eyes, when they met his, held something unspoken, an invitation to linger, to observe, to pay attention. It was subtle, yet magnetic. A small mishap, a dropped bag of groceries from her hand, a clatter of keys on the counter, gave him the first excuse to be close, and she didn't move away. She reached down with ease to steady him, fingers brushing against his for a fraction of a second, and the warmth of her touch lingered. Their eyes met, longer this time, and in that silent exchange he felt the first spark of connection, curiosity, respect, and the faintest flutter of something deeper that neither of them fully acknowledged yet. By the time he had placed his suitcase in the guest room, the house no longer felt unfamiliar. It already felt alive with her presence, gentle, graceful, and quietly insistent. And for him, that first impression was already impossible to forget. The way she smiled, the subtle warmth of her hand, and the sense that moving into her home was the beginning of something far more complex than a simple landlord-tenant arrangement. It was one of those quiet afternoons when the house seemed to hold its breath, the kind of stillness that made every sound sharper, every movement more noticeable. He had been unpacking boxes, trying to get a sense of his new space, when an unexpected slip, a bag tipping over and its contents spilling across the floor, sent him scrambling. Keys rolled under the couch, papers fluttered across the polished wooden floor, and for a moment, he felt a flush of embarrassment rising to his cheeks. Before he could reach for the keys, a hand appeared, not brusque, not hurried, but firm and reassuring. She bent slightly to help, and their hands brushed as they both reached for the same object. The touch was brief, almost accidental, yet it carried a warmth that lingered longer than expected. He felt the gentle pressure of her fingers, the smoothness of her skin against his, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow to that small contact. He straightened, slightly aware of how close they now were, and met her eyes. Her smile was soft, almost teasing, but it held a quiet confidence that made him feel both seen and safe. She didn't pull back. Instead, she allowed the moment to stretch, letting the silence between them hum with unspoken acknowledgement. There was a subtle gravity in the way she moved, a measured grace that seemed to fill the space, guiding him without demanding attention. As they bent to gather the scattered papers, Their shoulders brushed repeatedly, each contact brief but electric. He noticed the faint scent of her perfume, a delicate mixture of jasmine and something warm, that seemed to settle in the air around him. The warmth of her presence was grounding, yet stirring, an odd combination that made his heart beat a little faster without a clear reason. When the last item was picked up, she stood, her hand still lightly resting near his for a moment longer than necessary. "There," she said softly, her voice calm and comforting. "All in place." He couldn't help but notice the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the slight tilt of her head as she studied him with a quiet curiosity, as though gauging his reaction not just to the spill, but to being near her. They moved to straighten the living room together, and the proximity remained. He caught himself adjusting his posture, self-conscious, yet strangely drawn to her steadying presence. Every glance she cast his way seemed layered with unspoken meaning, interest, amusement, perhaps a hint of gentle challenge. And he, in turn, became acutely aware of how his own responses lingered longer than he intended, the brush of his sleeve against hers, the accidental closeness as they both reached for the same cushion, the warmth that seemed to pulse through the simple act of being near her. By the time the room was restored, he realized something had shifted. The house, already alive with quiet charm, now carried the unmistakable tension of closeness, unexpected, unspoken, but undeniable. He left her presence feeling both exhilarated and disoriented, the memory of her touch lingering like a gentle echo, and the quiet awareness that this was only the beginning of a connection that neither of them yet fully understood. That evening, the house had settled into a comforting quiet, with only the gentle hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the wooden floor to break the silence. He found himself lingering in the living room, a cup of tea in his hands, as she moved gracefully across the space, adjusting cushions and folding a soft blanket over the sofa. The way she moved, deliberate yet unhurried, drew his attention without him realizing it, every gesture calm, confident, and quietly mesmerizing. "Sit," she said, her voice soft but firm, nodding toward the chair across from her. There was an ease in her tone, a warmth that made the air between them feel lighter. He obeyed, and for the first time since arriving, he felt the weight of his nerves lift slightly, replaced by a gentle curiosity. They sat facing each other, each holding a steaming cup of tea. The conversation began with small things, how he had found the journey, the weather, the local shops, but gradually it deepened. She began to share glimpses of her life, childhood memories of her first home, the small triumphs and quiet disappointments of the years, and moments she rarely spoke aloud to anyone. He listened, captivated, not just by her words but by the way she said them, the subtle inflections in her voice, the soft shift of her eyes when recalling something meaningful, the slight curl of her lips in memory. As she spoke, he found himself noticing every little detail, the way a loose strand of hair fell across her cheek, how her hands moved as she held the cup, fingers curling lightly around it. Her presence felt grounding, yet there was an almost magnetic pull that made him lean forward slightly, unconsciously trying to catch every word, to be closer without stepping over an unspoken boundary. There were pauses in the conversation, moments where silence filled the room, but it was a warm, inviting kind of silence. She looked at him, not with expectation, but with a quiet curiosity, as if weighing the sincerity of his attention. He met her gaze, and in that exchange, a connection deepened, mutual respect, subtle fascination, and the first real sense that this was more than simple landlord and tenant. He realized that listening to her, truly listening, was intoxicating. Each story she shared was layered, revealing vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. When he offered a thoughtful response, she would tilt her head slightly, eyes softening, a fleeting smile brushing her lips. And when laughter occasionally escaped, a delicate, unguarded sound, he found himself smiling in return, the sound of it lingering in his chest. By the time the tea had cooled, the living room felt transformed. It was no longer just a house or a room. It was a space alive with shared presence, quiet intimacy, and the unspoken acknowledgement that something was beginning to blossom between them. That evening, he left the room with a sense of both exhilaration and tentative longing, aware that the small, seemingly mundane act of conversation had created a closeness he could neither name nor ignore. It was a late afternoon when the sunlight slanted through the windows, casting warm streaks across the living room. He had been rearranging a few things in the space, trying to make it feel more like his own, while she moved about with quiet precision, adjusting cushions and straightening small decorations. At first, the atmosphere was calm, almost domestic, but then came a playful disagreement, an innocent clash over where a vase should go, or whether the rug looked better angled slightly to the left. "I think it belongs here," she said, tilting her head, her fingers lightly brushing the surface of the vase. "It balances the light better." He countered gently, suggesting another spot. "Maybe over here? It catches the afternoon sun." She looked at him, eyebrows raised, a small smile playing at her lips. There was something in the curve of her expression, confident, teasing, that made his heart skip a beat. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of playful challenge in it, a spark that dared him to argue further. As he stepped forward to move the vase, she leaned slightly closer, her presence suddenly more immediate, more commanding. Without warning, she placed a hand on his chest, just above the heart, her fingers resting lightly but firmly. The gesture wasn't harsh or threatening, yet it carried a quiet assertion that made him pause. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed to shrink, the space between them charged with an unspoken tension. He felt the warmth of her touch through his shirt, subtle and grounding, yet it stirred something unexpected within him, a flutter of nervous excitement, a rapid beat of anticipation. She didn't move away. Instead, she tilted her head, as if silently daring him to react. He caught the faintest scent of her perfume, warm and inviting, and it wrapped around him, lingering long after she let go. The playful argument continued, each suggestion accompanied by subtle, intimate touches, a hand on his shoulder to guide him, fingers brushing as they both reached for the same cushion, even the accidental bump of their knees under the low table. Each contact was brief, seemingly accidental, yet charged with awareness. He became acutely conscious of how close they were, the way her body leaned slightly toward his, how her gaze held his longer than necessary. Laughter soon spilled from both of them, light and genuine, breaking the intensity while maintaining the undercurrent of tension. She teased him about his stubbornness, and he countered with mock indignation, but beneath the playful banter, there was a silent acknowledgement, either could ignore the pull between them. By the time the argument ended, the vase finally settled in a spot that felt right to both, but the true balance was no longer in the room, it was in the quiet, lingering energy between them. He stepped back, suddenly aware of how his heartbeat had quickened, how her presence seemed to fill every corner of the space. And she, with a soft smile and a glint of amusement in her eyes, seemed equally aware, leaving him with the undeniable sense that their playful challenge had drawn them closer in a way either expected. The afternoon faded into evening, but the room still held the warmth of connection, subtle desire, and the electric thrill of closeness, a tension that promised more moments like this in the days to come. In the days that followed the playful challenge, the house seemed to carry a new energy. Small gestures lingered longer, glances held a fraction of a second more, and even the quietest corners felt charged with unspoken meaning. He found himself noticing her in ways he hadn't before, how she moved through the kitchen, the subtle curve of her smile when she caught him watching, the warmth in her voice that made even ordinary words feel significant. One evening, as he tidied the living room, she entered carrying a tray of tea. The scent of chamomile and vanilla mixed with her perfume, creating a gentle, comforting aroma that wrapped around him. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch. He held the tray, unsure whether to place it on the table or offer it to her directly. She stepped closer, brushing lightly against his shoulder as she reached past him, the contact deliberate enough to make his pulse quicken without a word spoken. "Thank you," he said softly, almost involuntarily, aware of the warmth of her presence. Her smile was fleeting but meaningful. "It's nothing," she replied, yet the tilt of her head, the way her eyes searched his, hinted at something unsaid. He caught himself lingering on the curve of her neck, the soft line of her jaw, noticing details that had previously escaped him. Every movement she made felt magnetic, drawing him in even as he tried to maintain composure. As they settled with their tea, A comfortable silence filled the space, punctuated only by the faint clink of cups. He wanted to speak, to articulate the fluttering awareness of desire that had begun to take root, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he simply observed her, the way she stirred her tea slowly, the subtle crease of concentration on her forehead, the warmth radiating from her proximity. Each small gesture became a conversation of its own, a language of longing neither dared name. She, too, seemed attuned to the tension, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, fingers lingering near her temple, a movement that drew his gaze without her acknowledging it. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, brief and seemingly accidental touches that carried far more weight than either would admit. In these silent moments, the pull between them was undeniable, a delicate dance of awareness and restraint. He realized that desire need not always be spoken. It could exist in the smallest, quietest details, in lingering glances, in accidental touches, in the shared smile at the same memory. And though either of them spoke it aloud, both were acutely aware of the growing closeness, the magnetic pull that tied them together in the intimacy of everyday life. By the time the tea was finished, the room seemed warmer, heavier with a quiet tension that neither tried to break. He left her presence feeling a mix of exhilaration and hesitation, knowing that the unspoken acknowledgement of attraction had changed everything. That evening marked a turning point, the realization that their connection had moved beyond casual familiarity into something deeper, something emotionally charged and beautifully unspoken, waiting for the right moment to bloom fully. The evening air had grown cooler, and the soft glow of lamps cast long shadows across the living room. He was sitting on the couch, absently running a hand over the fabric of the cushion, when she entered. There was a tension in her posture he hadn't noticed before, a slight hesitation in her step, a faint crease between her brows. He knew immediately that the easy rhythm of their days together was about to shift. She stopped a few feet away, folding her arms loosely, eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him suddenly self-conscious. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm but layered with unspoken emotion. He nodded, heart beginning to thump in a way that felt both nervous and anticipatory. The conversation began carefully, with small admissions, about boundaries, about propriety, and about the complicated feelings that had been quietly growing between them. She spoke of her concern for appearances, the unspoken expectations of her age and social experience, and the hesitation that came with allowing herself to feel something so unexpected. He listened intently, leaning slightly forward, hands resting on his knees, trying to absorb not just her words but the subtle tremor in her voice, the slight tightening of her jaw when she paused. I didn't expect this," she admitted, eyes downcast for a moment, then flicking back to meet his. "I didn't expect to feel pulled towards someone so much younger, someone so different from me." He swallowed, feeling the weight of her honesty. "Neither did I," he said softly. "But the truth is, I can't ignore it. I didn't choose to feel this way, it just happened. And I respect you too much to push too far." His hands twitched slightly, his fingers brushing the edge of the cushion, a silent testament to his nervous anticipation. For a long moment, silence fell between them, charged yet comfortable. Then, slowly, she stepped closer. He felt the faint brush of her hand against his shoulder, deliberate but gentle, as if testing the waters of their shared vulnerability. Their eyes met, and in that quiet exchange, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They were both aware of the pull, the desire, and the need to navigate it with care. I think we can explore this," she whispered, voice low and steady. "But slowly. Carefully. Respectfully." Her hand lingered near his, hovering almost hesitantly, yet inviting. He reached for her fingers, interlacing them gently, feeling the warmth of her skin and the subtle strength beneath it. The simple contact carried years of unspoken longing, desire tempered by caution, and a promise that they would navigate this together. He nodded, a quiet smile breaking across his face. "Slowly," he agreed. "Step by step. No rushing. Just us." The tension in the room softened, replaced by a warm, steady intimacy. They sat together, hands touching lightly, shoulders brushing occasionally, the quiet space between them now a haven rather than a barrier. The air was filled with the subtle scent of her perfume, and the lingering warmth of mutual understanding. In that moment, the unspoken attraction had been acknowledged, not through grand gestures or declarations, but through honesty, patience, and the shared decision to tread carefully into something profound and lasting. By the time the lamps were dimmed and the night settled over the house, they had found a fragile equilibrium, a balance of desire, respect, and unspoken promise. The emotional confrontation had brought them closer, not just in longing, but in trust, and for the first time, both felt a quiet assurance that this connection, once uncertain, was now real and reciprocal. The following morning, the house felt unusually still, as if it too had been holding its breath after the quiet intensity of the previous evening. He found himself in the kitchen, making a cup of coffee, when she entered. There was a lightness in her step, a calm assurance that hadn't been there before, as if the honesty they had shared had lifted an invisible weight. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment either spoke, content to simply acknowledge each other's presence. She moved closer, carrying a small plate of breakfast. He noticed the subtle curve of her lips, the gentle warmth in her eyes, and the effortless way she carried herself, confident, graceful, and yet quietly vulnerable in the intimate moments they now shared. She set the plate down in front of him, her fingers brushing his hand lightly in passing. The touch was fleeting but electric, a reminder of the bond that had grown between them. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that made him feel immediately at ease. He returned the greeting, heart a little faster than normal, feeling the residual thrill of their unspoken connection. The morning sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating her features, the delicate line of her jaw, the soft curve of her smile, the gentle glow of skin kissed by the sun. He found himself captivated, not just by her beauty, but by the quiet strength and grace she exuded. As they ate together, conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and small, shared glances. There was no need for dramatic declarations or grand gestures. The intimacy they had built over days of quiet closeness spoke for itself. His hand brushed hers accidentally as he reached for the coffee, and neither moved away. Instead, their fingers lingered, a silent acknowledgement of mutual desire and the trust they had cultivated. Later, as the morning faded into afternoon, they found themselves in the living room, sitting side by side on the sofa. He hesitated for a moment, then leaned slightly toward her. She didn't pull back. Instead, she rested her head lightly on his shoulder, a subtle, trusting gesture that made his chest swell with warmth. He draped an arm gently across her shoulders, careful, deliberate, savoring the closeness. Their breathing fell into a quiet rhythm, the soft sound of each inhalation and exhalation filling the space between them. It was a simple moment, yet it held everything they had been building: trust, desire, understanding, and respect. No words were needed. The warmth of their touch, the light pressure of hands brushing, the shared quiet, the unspoken communication, said more than any confession ever could. They were together now, not in haste, not in recklessness, but in a steady, gentle commitment that promised care, attention, and a slow, beautiful unfolding of love. As the day stretched on, the house seemed to reflect their newfound harmony. The sun's rays danced on the walls, illuminating the corners they had shared laughter and quiet confessions in. And though the future remained uncertain in its details, the present was undeniable. They were connected, emotionally and physically, in a bond that felt safe, tender, and profoundly real. For the first time since he had moved in, he felt entirely at home, not just in the house, but in her presence. The slow burn of their relationship had reached its first true peak, and the quiet commitment they now shared promised that the days ahead would be filled with warmth, understanding, and the gentle unfolding of a love that had begun with a simple brush of hands, a shared glance, and the courage to feel deeply together.